Welcome to Evolve to Succeed, the podcast that brings together entrepreneurs, founders, business leaders and experts to talk about their journeys and explore the link between personal and business success. I'm your host, Warren Munson, founder of Evolve, a coaching, training and development company focused on enabling business and personal success and creating a community of like-minded individuals. Whether that be through our peer groups, one-to-one coaching, our training and development programs for you and your teams, or through our content and events, our mission is to get the best out of each individual and inspire them to be better both in life and in business. If you want to learn more about Evolve, including our beautiful co-working space in Ashley Cross in Poole, then please go to evolvemembers.com, where you'll find great content, insights, details of all of our services, and also information on our forthcoming events. For now though, let's get on with the show. Welcome to this week's episode. Today I'm talking to Emma Worrollo, founder of Playful Den, a company which helps teams, brands, kids and individuals embrace the power of play. Before founding Playful Den, Emma ran a consumer insight agency, and for more than 11 years she studied Gen Z and Gen Alpha and their parents. She has travelled all over the world to find out how they play, how they use tech, what their decision-making process is like, and what they consider to be fun. Using these insights, Emma has disrupted global brands by getting them to embrace innovative marketing methods targeted around generational attitudes. As you'll hear during our conversation, Emma believes that play is one of the purest ways we express ourselves, and she is of the mind that both children and adults don't play enough or have even forgotten how to play, and this can become a cause of all sorts of issues, including anxiety, loneliness, and self-doubt. Amongst other things, Emma talks about topics from the importance of looking at the world with a childlike wonder, the dangers of being too focused on productivity, and how the concept of professionalism can suppress your authentic self as well as your creative thinking, to the important role of play within leadership, our different play styles, and what her work as a Lego serious play facilitator, yes, that is a true title, entails. Please enjoy the episode. Welcome, Emma, to the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's brilliant to have you on a guest. We're going to be talking all things playful today. That's going to be our subject and how that relates to also business. But I suppose for our listeners, just be worth you explaining a little bit about the business you founded, Playful Den, and your philosophy of living playfully.
Yeah, absolutely. So Playful Den is still a relatively new-ish venture for me. My background is more in the sort of corporate world. So I ran a consumer insight agency called the Pineapple Lounge for 11 years. And I was a specialist in kids, family and youth research. So doing strategic consultancy for global brands. Had office in London, office in New York, lots of travel, lots of sort of corporate work. And in the pandemic, like many people, had a bit of a rethink. Also, we had our third child right at the start of the pandemic, so it's quite a lot going on.
Life changed quite dramatically, quite quickly.
Very much so, yeah. And I think, I was sort of ready for the next level of me, and also to put some of my knowledge that I had learnt in my research career into the wider world to reach parents, to reach organisations about different topics. So Playful Den was my Instagram handle. That was my Instagram channel. It grew quite organically. I called it the Playful Den because that was our home. That was kind of the name that I had for our home. And I was posting quite a lot about interiors and all of that sort of stuff. And when I was sort of making the career pivot, I thought that will be my brand, and I will specialise in all things play. So I'm still exploring sort of how I put that out into the world, but I do a mix of things. I have a podcast, I do brand consulting, I go into businesses and teach them about what play in the workplace means. I write, I do innovation, I do sort of lots of different things, but play is at the heart of everything that I do.
And has play always been something within your character?
Yeah, I think it's quite innate in my personality, but as a children's researcher, I also was studying it quite a lot.
Yeah.
So brands obviously wanted to know what are kids doing, what are their behaviours. So I was studying what they were engaging with, what they were playing, what they were gaming, who they were listening to, all of that sort of stuff. And part of that process really meant that I had to look at the world with the lens of a child, with childlike wonder. This was my job for over a decade. And I think what I realised was that this is actually a really valuable skill for anyone, to have this sense of childlike wonder, to be able to hold things with a lightness. That's what sort of playfulness is. To be able to carve out time for creativity, to lean into your imagination. All of these skills that we associate and often leave behind in childhood, actually really, really valuable for things like mental health, for innovation, for business, and even in like your personal relationships as well. I really found that having a playfulness to my character massively helped me sort of navigate stresses as a parent.
Okay, I mean, there's so much to explore there. My mind's already kind of blown, really. But I suppose that one of the things that first strikes me is, you talk about the lightness, that we carry as a child, and that childlike wonder that we have, and you can recall it and you can see it in my own children. It's wonderful. But we do lose that, don't we?
Yes.
And are you a believer that we can get that back as adults?
Yes. So children are meant to play all the time. There is a difference between play and playfulness. So I think that's quite important to touch on. So play is an activity. It's something that I try and inspire people to find within their own lives. It's something that you do just for fun, for no other reason. And that is something that we actually stop doing as adults. Everything becomes about productivity. It has to have an outcome. It has to be quantified. There is this sort of seriousness around life as we become an adult. We have responsibilities, etc., etc. I'm not saying that as adults we should play all the time.
Just ignore all of that serious
because
stuff.
the world would probably fall apart. But we can retain playfulness. So playfulness is where we apply the characteristics of play to things that are not really playful. So a really simple example is most people, when they're doing a really boring chore, will put on music to pass the time in a way that's more enjoyable. At its most simplest, that's kind of an example of what playfulness is. It's how do we make things that are perhaps things that we don't necessarily want to do, or that are quite hard, or that might be quite boring or monotonous or challenging. How do we bring that sense of lightness to them? And that's kind of what playfulness is. The really interesting thing about playfulness is that it is a characteristic available to anyone. So we might have this belief that some people are born with it and some people aren't. That's not actually true. You can access it at any time with the right mindset and by sort of just tweaking your sort of behavior and lens on life.
But there must be times where you go into an organization or you're consulting and you feel like you are banging your head against the wall to get them to think in a playful way. And what other techniques that you use and then adopt? So, I mean, because you are trying to break down some strong barriers, aren't you? Particularly potentially in some very big corporate organisations or professional service organisations that are very staid, and it's got to be done this way and not done in a playful way. Yeah,
and there's a few, they all begin with P, but there's a few P's that sort of really get in the way. So professionalism is a really interesting word and concept. It is obviously important on many levels, but it can really suppress people's personality and authentic self, and it can stifle getting into flow and being creative, because you're almost sort of playing a role, you're playing a serious character that can prohibit some of those ways of thinking.
Having been there, your training is to be like that, right? That's how you're trained to be,
Exactly. And then the other one is productivity. So if organisations are so cripplingly productivity focused, it's really, really difficult to allow space to imagine, allow space to be creative, because when you are so driven by productivity, every action that you take has to have an outcome. And if you remember what I said about play, it's about doing things that don't always have an outcome. So lots of companies make the mistake of trying to make a workplace more playful by like putting in bean bags or putting like a ping pong table in. Yeah. And those are like red flags to me. It's much more about in your processes. So it's like, what happens in your meeting? Like, do people enjoy these meetings? Are they engaged? Like, what would happen if we reframe this meeting through the lens of fun? What would it look like then? And it's sort of little things like that, but it has to be baked into your actual processes. Like, environment is definitely a part of it, but you can't just put a bunch of beanbags in and an arcade machine and be like, yay, we're a playful culture. Yeah, it's got to be within the work, and it's all about finding what elements of people's role really gets them into flow as well, because what often you find is people have parts of their job that they really enjoy, and they're flow parts of their jobs where they're just like so in the groove and they can just like do it and they enjoy it, and it often really does kick back value to what they're working on. But when you look at where they spend their time, often those are like the smallest parts, and there is a strange thing that can happen where the parts of the jobs that we really enjoy and we're in flow in, we almost like can't justify doing them, or we sort of like we shrink the time of them. So that's part of it as well. It's like, what is your flow work and how does that manifest itself in how your time is split?
Would that be the same? Another way of putting that would be in some ways playing to strengths and weaknesses, or would you say that is something different?
I think it fits with that. Yeah, I think it's a little bit different in that I think we're looking at what are people's almost like where do they bring their authentic self to their work. So one of the things about play is when you are at play, that is when you are the most authentic version of yourself. Yeah. That is when you are your truest
And is
self.
That because you're not showing so many inhibitions?
That's right, yeah. And you're also, there's a vulnerability in playing. You know, if I took you to an improv class now, you would feel really vulnerable. And there would be a sort of a shared experience there in doing that. And it would be a real true version of yourself. And I think it's related to strengths and weaknesses, but it's more about like what are the aspects of people's role where they're allowed to bring their authentic self to their work.
But that comes from leadership, isn't it? So most of those assignments and organisations that you spend time talking to about this, do you need to start right at the top? Because it is a culture thing, isn't it? And a leadership thing, and that sense of, are they going to allow this within the organisation full stop? And that must be your first hurdle.
It really
that
is.
You have to overcome.
It has to come from the top down, yeah. And I'm really interested in the qualities of leadership and how we like celebrate what they are. And for example, one word that we often use when we talk about leaders is visionary. Like, we love that word. Oh, they're a visionary. It's very like aspirational. What we mean by being a visionary is actually someone with a really big imagination. We don't use that word imagination because imagination is what kids do.
That sounds like play again, doesn't
that's
it?
what kids do. That's like, you know, that's not for our serious business world. But so I think in our language, we already sort of stifle those kind of playful traits by not talking about them. Often, again, you'll hear what people are trying to do in the workplace, and I listen to it and I think, oh, they're actually talking about play, but they don't use that word because people are don't really understand what it is. So it absolutely does have to come from leadership, and to exhibit some of those traits themselves, and to make space within the culture for moments that aren't just about churn and productivity. That is a really key part of it, and ultimately, yes, that has to come from the top.
It has to come from the top. And where does different this is probably one of those big questions, but where does different generations fit into this, and the expectations of different generations in the workplace to be playful or not be playful? And again, any tips for the listeners with different types of businesses and different ages in their teams, that how they can install play through those different generation expectations?
Such a good question, and this is such an interesting time, isn't it? Because we've got sort of 5 generations sort of living and walking the planet,
and we've
side
had
by
side. So much change in terms of technology and everything, that everybody's different, aren't they? Those 5 generations may normally live together, but they would be closer together in mindset.
I think one thing about play is that it is universal in that it really can bring people together. So if you think about getting a bunch of people of different backgrounds, different generations, trying to work on a really sort of challenging project with a really stressful deadline, really stressful leadership, there's going to be lots of collision there. If you're able to reframe that exercise in a way that perhaps is feels more like a game, it maybe encourages people to bring their play style to the activity, the chances are you're going to find more universal ways of connecting there, because people are less going to bring their generational traits, and they're more just going to show up just as they are, and sort of who they are. And I think that's a really interesting one to think about, how you sort of cut through some of those tensions and differences. I don't know if I'd say that if like one generation feels like more playful than another, because even like Gen Z can be quite serious and can be very sort of interested in like problem solving and reimagining what already exists, whereas like millennial generation is more interested in perhaps like invention and coming up with new. So there's a real like creativity in both of those directions, but they're doing slightly different things. Again, if you were able to see those as a leader and kind of play with those a bit in the way that you mobilize people, that can be really interesting, rather than sort of pulling people apart and everyone's doing different things. Don't put everybody in
a box, put people together and get them to unite, I suppose. And is there any leaders out there or businesses that you see out there that perhaps our listeners would resonate with, that you think are doing playfulness well?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think there's like a difference between what happens like consumer facing and what goes on kind of behind closed doors. And there are some brands that sort of show up in the world as doing a really good job at sort of like bringing people together. I think like McDonald's is one that continues to bring in like these little playful touches, like for families and non-families as well, and does a really nice job of bringing play into what they do. IKEA is another one. They're always like thinking about how to make these like playful touches to family life and the home, but it's difficult to say like behind the scenes how that kind of manifests. And I can't really drop names, but I have worked for like some of like the most what you would perceive to be like fun brands in the world, and you look behind the curtain and you're like, wow, I might as well be in like a bank or an industry that like perhaps isn't in the business of fun and play. So it's different between what you see and what kind of goes on behind the curtain, I think.
Yeah, I suppose again, we probably shouldn't name the names, but there's some big sort of theme park operators in the world, and what you see and hear about them is the gloss, and behind closed doors the reality of that organisation might be different, or those organisations. I also saw, and I'm really intrigued by this, that you're a Lego serious play facilitator. Now that to me sounds like wonderful. Let me at it. So what is a Lego serious play facilitator? Yeah,
so that is a way of using Lego bricks and resources in more organisational environments. So you have a kit and you do various different exercises and scenarios. Actually, to do it properly takes a really long time, like 1 to 2 days. You can do with like a sort of a core team, and you're really working on like knotty, thorny issues. It works. It's incredibly effective because obviously it taps into flow and into play, and because the tactility that we really do crave as humans taps into a subconscious level of thinking. So the idea is that you would propose a question, and rather than answer it written or with words, you build it. So into that build, you're putting really sort of like deep thinking about you're putting in metaphors and stories, and it's not really about creating a particularly beautiful or stunning model. It's about what it represents. So you're creating meaning from nothing. That's what you do through that process. So you can do it for all sorts of like different things. I've done it around purpose, is one it works quite well for, to really get to like what is the purpose of your business. And you can follow a sort of laddering process where you're building these little models individually, put them together as a team, you move them around, you combine them, and you're sort of working up and up and up and up to arrive at what is your business purpose.
Wow.
It's very cool.
It's very cool, definitely. And in terms of, organisations that are playful, do you think that definitely helps? I think the obvious answer to this is yes, is that work-life balance. There's this myth, isn't there, particularly for business owners, business leaders that run their own business, you've been there, done that, got that t-shirt, that we need this work-life balance. Is being playful an aid to that?
Yeah, I think it really is. It's we're in this sort of post-pandemic time for work, and lots of people are obviously reevaluating that. We are reimagining what work means, what going to work, what we want that to look like, and how that might exist. I think there's a slight perhaps nuance between how we are structuring our time, so in terms of like actual hours on the job, and then what is involved actually when we're at work. And I think when we are at work, that's kind of what I'm most interested in. It's like, how do we ensure that we feel like what we're doing is like meaningful and fun? Like I really think that fun is underestimated. I think that when people hear the word fun, they might think like bouncy castles and water fights and like these kind of like big, blow up kind of ideas of big fun. But actually it's really important. Like it is something that we quite naturally do. Like the example I gave of, making a boring activity more enjoyable. And I think it's really lacking from the way that businesses think about roles and think about working together. And I think if you looked at different processes and ways of working and said, okay, we're just going to forget everything and we're going to be like, if we had to make this as fun as possible, how would we change it? And I think what that exercise throws up is really quite interesting, because it often also shortcuts politics, like all of the kind of BS that kind of gets sort of logged in systems and processes, and it kind of makes that experience when you are on the job more of that sort of like flow state. I'm not talking about like everyone coming to work and on scooters and being dressed up as clowns. Talking about like what is everyone's sort of like base
and that's
level
probably what
enjoyment.
some listeners here will be struggling with, is they're
Yeah.
struggling with this kind of concept of work needs to be fun, playfulness, and they'll get all those terms and concepts, but what does it really mean in reality? And letting go of that kind of nearly the commerciality, and not quite connecting that perhaps having an environment at work that can be fun and playful can also be commercial and
and part of the
successful.
challenge in that is because people don't understand what play is. So understanding your own play style is really important. Like we have all of these like Myers-Briggs and things like that, don't we, that people do in the workplace. But actually I think understanding your own play style and everyone else's in your team is actually way more insightful.
So let's go through and explore some of those play styles.
Yeah, so we can use a theory from a guy called Dr. Stuart Brown, who's an amazing sort of play scientist. He came up with a few. So we have play styles like the kinesthete, which is all about movement, using your body. There's the artist, which is obviously about making, creating, like actually making stuff. There's the director, who loves planning, loves organising, loves sort of like leading, doesn't necessarily have to be the boss, but really enjoys sort of rallying people together. There's the competitor, very obviously competitor, collector. There's the joker, so the person that kind of brings the fun. And understanding these, you can play little exercises where you'll be like, okay, we'll take this process that we do as a team and we're going to run it through the play style of James over there. And we would see how James would design that in the style of his play. And it's really insightful to understand one another and how we might work together. And also if you're sort of mentoring or, you're sort of managing, to understand who is like this person that when they're in play, their authentic self, because it can help understand how to motivate them and how to engage them, which goes back to how do we make things more fun for this person. The other challenge is people assuming that play is always about sort of like extrovert, noisy, loud behaviours. For a lot of people, play is reading, it's baking, it's chess. Is that
creativity more?
Yeah, it's kind of more... It can be very subtle, it can be quiet, it can be calm. It really is any activity where you find yourself sort of lost in time and you really are in flow with it. And that can be for some people it'd be fixing a car, it can be, it can be absolutely anything. So really sort of understanding what those activities are that appeal to different people is quite insightful and helpful.
And a lot of organisations now, know of some, locally to here that will, give their teams, half a day every other week or on a Friday afternoon to do things they want to do. Now, what's your feelings about that? Is that just the start of what organisations should be doing? Clearly, it's better than doing nothing. I mean, or are you that we should be bringing play into every aspect of every day of our workplace?
I think that raises a really interesting conversation of like, if you do have roles that are, to be really transparent, these are really boring. Like we know
processing roles,
like it's really difficult to make these more interesting. So how do we allow them to get that playfulness, that creativity elsewhere? Then you can think about that in the structure of time. And the other thing people don't understand about play is that it has a magical effect outside of the activity. So we all know that we do better work if we go for a walk before we do it. At a sort of base level, I think that's quite sort of common conversation now in business. It's like, if you want to do something a bit creative or focused, like move your body or, go and like be outside in nature and then do the thing. And the reason for that is when we play and when we're in that sort of state of flow and of enjoyment and we're relaxed but we're focused, what is happening in our brain is called this thing called plasticity. So that's what play does for us. It creates a plasticity in the brain, which is essentially like opening up different routes. So people that play and people that exhibit this quality of playfulness tend to see more opportunities. So when they're faced with a challenge, someone that is quite play deprived and perhaps is in quite a kind of fixed mindset will either like panic and won't know what to do, or they'll only see one option. Someone that has play in their life, has a sense of playfulness, will see multiple routes out of that particular challenge. And that's why it is important to either bring the play into the workplace or make sure that people have the balance that you talked about to get it elsewhere, because it has this trickle down effect into other areas of our life.
Brilliant. And in terms of, play and play at home, you say the business is called the Playful Den, kind of focused on your own, what you call your own home and your own family. What do you think we should be doing more at home in terms of creating a playful kind of existence? Yeah,
great question. I think boundaries are increasingly challenging with work in this time that we're in, both because people are working from home more. We call it working from home, but we could also say they're living at work. And also technology as well. So we are always on, always available. What that means is that it's much harder to hold that boundary between home and work. And I think that is something that it's really hard, but we have to keep working at that. For me, that has been like an ongoing journey and continues to. I sort of thought like one day I'd learn how to do it and that would be it. But I realise it's actually like an ongoing practice. But that is really important, because if you are stressed and if you are distracted, it's impossible to play. So those two things make it really, really hard. So if you've got people in your home that you have a relationship with, partner, co-parent, kids, if you have a head full of I am meant to be or I should be doing something else, you're going to find it really hard to connect with them in play.
That comes back to that old adage of being present in the moment, doesn't it? Which we all find extremely difficult. Don't we? It's not easy to do, but you'd say being playful is at the heart of being present in the moment.
I think connecting with people through play I really advocate for. So for example, my husband and I go on play dates. I always play dates over dinner dates are far more effective because we do both work from home a lot, we see each other a lot, and I'm kind of like, I don't know if I need to go for another dinner with you but I would like to go and do an activity where we will both be vulnerable. That's the other thing to think about with your choice of play activities, because a lot of adults, they have hobbies or they have things that they
go where they're safe.
They're quite good at, So maybe you do the same running route every week, or you do this gym routine, or you do a craft that you've become quite skilled at over time, there isn't as much richness in the play when you do something that you're an expert at. I think that we really overrate expertise as a sort of culture, and actually beginner mindset is way more playful. So if I take you to something now that you've never done before, you're the amateur. In a way, you have to be the fool. And that's where it's at for me.
And it probably takes you back to your childhood where you try things constantly for the first time, don't you?
So I've recently started learning the aerial hoop, and in the class I'm in the beginners, and sometimes I glance over at the ones that they're so beautiful and they just make it look so effortless, and there's teenagers in this class and they shouldn't be allowed in there with me because it's very unfair. But I think actually I am probably getting like a completely different level of stuff that's going on in my brain than them that can do it in a way that they're in flow and they're an expert. Whereas for me, every single little thing that I do is such a massive win, and it's like a completely new way of connecting to my body and telling it to move in this way. So I think making sure that you are continually engaged in that role of be the fool, be the amateur, get into beginner's mindset, that is where the good stuff is.
Right. Wow. Okay. And I'm going to have to ask you this question. There must be, I mean, your energy is coming across in this conversation. Our listeners will be hearing it. You've got this kind of, smile on your face and great sense of energy. But there must be days when you wake up, Emma, and go, can't be playful today.
Oh my God, almost like every day. Like honestly, and I try and be quite authentic on my socials, because the reality is I have 3 children. I do have a career and I have a job that I really enjoy and I'm interested in, but it is still a business. I still have to make sure that I've got enough work in, and there's sort of all of the sort of normal stresses exist, and I do find that I find myself get into these ruts where I'm like, okay, I'm in it now. The seriousness has consumed me, but I know how to identify it, and I'll just do something really simple. Sometimes I wear my roller skates under my desk so that every time I have to get up, I have to roller skate to the toilet.
I'd fall over at that point.
I have a hula hoop that I'll just go outside and do that. I'll go on my bike, and I think it's the times when you actually need play the most are the times when you find it most hard and you feel like you haven't got time for it. That is when you have to do it, because of that trickle effect, that halo effect that I talked about. And it really, really does work. So I have kind of become quite disciplined at that now. I in my schedule, I have a play day once a month. So every day in my calendar there's a play day where I am not parenting and I'm not working, and on that day I can do something that is joyful to me. Normally I go on a hike and I go and get lost somewhere, but the impact of that, like this is, I wish I could give everyone a play day every month. And it's something that, when I was at the peak of running my agency and like full, as my husband would call me, corporate M's, I would never have thought I'd have had time for that. I never would have made space for it, when the reality is I actually could have, if I'd have really prioritized it.
So is the Emma sat in front of me today completely different to corporate M's?
I think there's my personality is very consistent, and I think
we are who we are, aren't we?
I took that everywhere, and there's something that obviously comes with life experience and wisdom and all that sort of stuff, but I was definitely addicted to work at times, very much so. I had several quite nasty burnout sort of mental breakdowns that were really quite serious, from just going to bed at night and not being able to sleep under the pressure of, the business and the figures and the staff and all of that sort of stuff. There was a real heaviness that I carried with the role of being a leader. There was a lot of aspects of running a business I realise now are actually really not in my strengths or sort of fire me up. Very good at the branding, clients, marketing, ideas, doing the actual sort of services, but although I was hopefully a good manager and a good leader, I found it really difficult to disconnect from the emotion that can come with that. And some people are very good at this. They can kind of be very, I'm in work, got to have a difficult conversation, and now I go home. I always found that really, really hard to leave it behind. The boundary that we talked about, it always bled over, and I think now I don't really have that so much anymore. No.
And when you reflect, what would you have done differently going back to that?
I had a play day once a month. Honestly,
simple as that.
It would have fixed me. It really would have.
Wow.
It really would have made such a difference. And it just so many times where I was like busy. That was my like default status, and now and I thought that was successful. I thought that was like what it meant to be successful. And now I'm much more about quality over quantity, and I'm very comfortable. I'm very comfortable being like mediocre at some stuff, as long as I know like what I do want to excel at and where I really do want to kind of fire up. I think I used to try and be brilliant at everything, and now I'm kind of like, I'm okay doing like 70% on that, because I know over here I'm like 110%. Okay.
And what are your aspirations, Emma, for the Playful Den?
Yeah, good question. They're sort of slightly evolving. I was working on a products-based business, and I think I've slightly parked that recently because I would like to do that more in collaboration with existing companies. Okay. So I'm actually focusing more on growing my brand on social media with content, and growing my podcast, and then working on my consultancy business as well. So those are the sort of, I've slightly filtered down from all of the different things that I was trying out. I was in a very fun experimental time. I was doing coaching and mentoring and workshops and all sorts of things, and now I'm very much focused on my consulting business, my podcast, and my content.
Brilliant. And we just had a conversation around success, but I always end with this question, so I'm going to have to end with it. In terms of success and personal success, what does that really look like for you, Emma?
I think success for me now is about living playfully. That is how I want to feel like I am living playfully. That is my purpose. That's what I'm trying to communicate to other people, and I want to feel like I am doing that myself. And for me, what that means is it means retaining a really open mind. So always being able to try new things, learn new things, and being sort of like really flexible in that, and continual creativity. Like the more I get to be creative, like that is what success is for me, because my previous version of success meant that was encroached upon, because I was chasing the sort of hard metrics, the meetings, the money, all of these things. It was all
KPI driven.
Yeah. Whereas now I'm like, if I take on a project that like really engages my creativity, that's really is success for me.
Brilliant. It's been great to have you as a guest, Emma, on the podcast. You know, we have these conversations and I always take something away, but my mind is quite blown from this conversation because I get it and understand it, and I just don't think I do enough of it myself, you know.
Most people don't. You're not alone.
You know, you've challenged my own thinking through the course of this conversation, so thank you for being a guest. If people want to know more about you and more about the Playful Den, where can they go?
Yeah, you can just search Playful Den for my website, and I'm on Instagram at playful_den.
Perfect. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Evolve to Succeed podcast. My hope with every episode is that you've learned something new or heard something that challenged your way of thinking and further motivated you on your path towards becoming a more knowledgeable, informed and inspired individual and business leader. If you enjoyed this episode, then please help us by rating, reviewing and subscribing. We really value your feedback and would love to have you along for future episodes. And please don't forget to learn more about Evolve by going to evolvemembers.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.